different kind of coming of age story. This is chapter 21 of Author Talks with Lisa T, and I recently had the pleasure of chatting with Colleen Oakley about her new novel, Jane and Dan at the End of the World. Her story about a middle-aged couple at the brink of their relationship who then get caught up in a hostage situation during an anniversary dinner will have you laughing out loud and maybe looking at how your own middle-aged life has turned out. Just right off the bat, I want you to tell us about this story because the premise is really not like any other book I've picked up.
Well, I love hearing that because I like to write fresh, interesting, unique books that surprise people. So that's a huge compliment. Thank you. Yeah, so this story, Jane and Dan at the End of the World, is about Jane and Dan, surprise, surprise, a couple who have been married for 19 years, and Jane is not quite sure they're going to make it to 20. The two of them go out to celebrate their 19th wedding anniversary. And before the second course is even served, a group of underground eco terrorists storms into the dining room of this restaurant, takes everybody hostage. And my tagline is if Jane and Dan can survive this, maybe they can survive anything, even marriage.
From there, what unfolds is an examination of middle life, of
Mhm.
middle age, of a marriage, of what it means to be a parent, and also, I guess, what it means to be a struggling writer. And so
Yes.
I'm not really giving it away because it is mentioned in a lot of the descriptions of the book.
Mhm.
But Jane is sitting here in this restaurant. She realizes that these who have stormed the restaurant are using her novel that she's convinced nobody has read as their game plan.
Yes.
Where did this concept of criminals imitating a not successful book come from?
Well, it was really fun to make Jane a novelist. I think that kind of occurred to me first because, being an author, which I've been now for 10 years, it is a roller coaster of a journey. There are a lot of really high highs and successes and ups, and then there's a lot of really low lows, and you're really only as good as your last book. So it was really fun to explore that and what it meant to Jane to feel like a failed novelist and like the one thing that she wanted to be really good at. And then I really found the humor in her believing that nobody had read this book that, sold less than 500 copies 6 years earlier. And then her starting to notice that this eco-terrorist group is actually doing things that are right out of her novel. I just thought that was so funny. And I needed to I needed to make um there needed to be some lightness and some humor in this book when people are being taken hostage. I wasn't writing a thriller per se. I wasn't, the gore and the crime didn't interest me as much as the internal characterization of these people.
And I think a lot of women are probably going to relate to Jane. She did something, which in this case is wrote a
Mhm.
book, but after that, she got lost in her marriage, she got lost in
Mhm.
motherhood and raising her kids, and now she's sitting here at dinner in middle age and wondering like, is that it? Is that everything? Is there anything
Mhm.
else?
Yeah, I do hope people relate to her. I mean, that's certainly what I was exploring. I am middle-aged. I've been married for 17 years, and there does get to be this feeling sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you don't love your husband and your kids and your life, of course, but there's this feeling of monotony, of every day being the same, of shuffling your kids to all the carpools and the piles of laundry, and it's just kind of like that Peggy Lee song, "Is This All There Is?" And I think Jane is stuck squarely in the middle of all those feelings and really trying to figure out who she is as a person. I mean, I think that we think so often that coming of age novels are dealing with teenagers and people maybe in their early 20s, but I actually think we come of age at many different stages in our life. And I think she's at her own reckoning in her life.
As someone who myself I'm in my mid 40s and my
Mhm.
friends, I know there's this kind of this reckoning versus like who we thought we were gonna be, like we were in our 20s and figuring it out, and who we are now and where we are now and how the 2 have really not aligned at all.
100%. I think we all deal with that at some point, and what that means, right? Does that mean that you failed in some way? It's, like, all about how you look at it and what your perspective is, and I find that really, really interesting.
Tell me why you said writing this book required, and these are your words, a crowbar, jaws of life, and vodka.
Not necessarily in that order. Um, yeah, every book is so different. This was the 6th book of mine that I've written, and they each require something completely different. And I think, when you're doing something and that's your career, you hope that each one will be easier than the last, right? Like each book that you write, well, now I know what I'm doing and it's going to be easier. But unfortunately, and probably it's like this in most of the arts, music, writing, painting, each one just requires something so different. And so for this one, it just was such a challenge. It took me 2 years to write. It was very hard to strike that delicate balance between the humor and the depth of emotion and the tension, because you want the reader to be flying through the pages and trying to figure out how Jane and Dan are going to get out of this predicament. And so there was kind of a lot of balls that I was juggling, and sometimes that juggling was not so easy.
You've got a character who feels really contemporary, the Otto character,
Hmm.
and that could have gone, the time you've taken to write it. I'm sure that could have fallen one way or another, but it just turns out in this day and age with everything going on in the political landscape, it makes sense. He
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I I'm sorry that I was so prescient with the title, "The End of the World." I wish I wish maybe things weren't quite so volatile politically, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a bit of an eat the rich theme, and I'm taking poking some fun at billionaires and kind of where we find ourselves with billionaires and the government, and finding themselves to be bedfellows. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of that in the novel, and certainly doing the research for that led me down some interesting rabbit holes.
I don't want to give it anything away, but how does your publicity team feel about where the book went?
I think they might have been concerned at first when my when my agent called and said, "Okay, Colleen's writing a book about terrorism, but it's funny." And I think it was just crickets for a while on the phone call. But fortunately, I do have a team that's so supportive and they trust me. And I think for some reason they trusted that I could pull it off.
No
I
feelings hurt.
Yeah,
It-
no feelings were hurt. Without giving spoilers, they did take all that with a grain of salt and think that it was very funny.
So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Jane and Dan have this probably will go down in their marriage or their history as one of the worst dates that they've ever been on.
For sure.
What's the worst dating experience you've had?
Oh my gosh.
Not to
Um,
put you on the spot.
I know. Well, I'm trying to think of one that's appropriate to share because I've had some real zingers. Um, oh gosh. I'll give a vague overview and you can let your imagination fill in the rest. I was on a first date with this guy when I lived in New York. We had met on Match and it was going fine. I didn't know that there would be a second date, but he was entertaining enough. And I excused myself and went to the bathroom. And when I went to the bathroom, I got a text that was from him, but he had meant to send it to his
Oh.
friend. And it was very, very unflattering.
Oh no. Yeah, that would rank high up there, I would
Yeah,
think.
it was bad.
Um, what do you want readers to take away from this?
I hope that it's an escape because Lord knows we all need to escape right now from reality. So I hope it's fun and entertaining and just gives them a few hours to kind of forget about the world. Um, but also, I really hope that they relate to it. I hope they see themselves in Jane. I hope that they feel seen and not alone if they are also struggling in midlife and marriage and parenting.
And it's just so nice to pick up a book like this and have it be reflected of, it's not a young 20 something, and it's a woman who is living her life, and it's not like she's like some washed up grandma at this point, you know.
Right, right. I do think that there's a real need for more books about women our age. I love a good love story. I love a good romance. I love, the meet cute and that fresh beginning of love but I just think that there's so much to explore and discuss in that midpoint of life when you are past the, early heady beginning stages of love and trying to figure out what real love and real commitment really mean and what they look like.
So of all the books you've written, which one would would you not be surprised if like you were sitting somewhere and you're like, "Oh my god, this is the plot to my book."
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I know some that I definitely would not want to be in the plot of my book, including this one. That would be terrifying. Oh my gosh. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Tanner and Louise would be really fun. Going on a cross country road trip and being chased by the cops, I think would be exciting.
I know you've just put this one out in the world, but what are you working on next?
I actually have three different things in the hopper right
Oh,
now, and I
wow.
probably need to commit to one. One is a very, very fun holiday rom com. One is an epic love story that spans 50 years. And one is a historical fiction novel inspired by the true story of a psychic horse.
Which one of these is not like the others? Well,
Right?
but but I have a writing question for you. You have these 3
Yeah.
ideas in front of you. When you
Hmm.
pick the one you wanna spend your time on, do you discard the other ones, or do they just go into a drawer for another time?
I'm hoping with these that I'm going to get to write all three of them. It's just going to be a matter of the order. When it comes, like, these are three ideas I feel very committed to, and it is rare for me to have three at the same time that I feel committed to. Typically, how it happens is I have all of these ideas, and then one just won't leave me alone. And that's the one that I work on. And then the others just kind of go by the wayside, and I never really pick them up again. So this is unusual, but I'm hoping that all three of these will make it onto bookshelves at some point.
Oh, and I'm sure they'll be just as much fun to read as this one. Uh, I'm talking to Colleen Oakley. The newest book is Jane and Dan at the End of the World. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today to chat about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. This was fun.
And that's where we close the book on this chapter. Another big thank you to Colleen Oakley for coming on the show. Her new book, Jane and Dan at the End of the World, is on sale now. If you're a fan of this podcast and haven't signed up for my newsletter yet, what are you waiting for? Head on over to lisatbooks.com to sign up. And don't forget, you can also connect with me on Instagram at LisaTBooks. Keep turning those pages. I'm Lisa T.